I need to find something else. The small cans of cat food don't seem to satisfy him anymore. I wonder what I should use. Have you ever had a picky pet? One that just wouldn't eat the food that you got for them? Well, that's how Mr. Skittles is. He used to eat almost everything, but now something's changed. Mr. Skittles is the stray cat I recently adopted. Or rather, he just let himself into my home and I've been caring for him. It's very cute, long calico. He has very cute, long calico hair, which is exceptionally rare among male cats. That's why I call him Mr. Skittles, since he has so many colors. I suppose it makes sense. Mr. Skittles is not an ordinary calico cat. He's very big, very talkative, and just kind of larger than life. Above all, though, what he is especially ravenous. He is the hungriest animal I have ever seen. I feel like if he had been orange, I would have named him Garfield. It may have been the best name since Mr. Skittles eats more than a large breed of dog would. Dry food, wet food, people food, garbage, just about anything he can get at, he will eat. I was worried he would eat me out of house and home. My habit for feeding the strays was never too expensive, yet with Mr. Skittles and how much he could put away, it was getting crazy. At some point, he stopped eating his food. I thought this was very strange since he was always perpetually hungry, but he seemed to ignore my attempts at feeding him for a few days and just lounged around. I decided to take the surplus and try and feed some of the other strays, but I noticed that they weren't coming around the house anymore. I considered it might just be a territorial thing and they figured Mr. Skittles reigned supreme here now, but I still thought it was odd. The next few days I noticed missing posters appearing for some folks' cats and dogs. I felt bad and hoped they would find them, but was troubled by how many there were. I thought I might have to keep Mr. Skittles inside where it was safe in case there was something dangerous in the neighborhood. I found it difficult to make him stay in. I offered him some cat food and he turned his nose at it. I kept offering him food to keep him and he kept yowling back at me as if he were offended by the meager tribute. I even tried to give him a raw steak in the fridge and he turned that down as well. He just kept howling at the door to be let out, so I finally just opened it for him. He raced away and out of sight. Later that night, I heard what sounded like a cat fight outside. And when I went out to check on it, I found Mr. Skittles ready to come inside. I was concerned since it appeared that he had several splotches of blood on his fur and especially around his face. The fact that he did not possess any wounds meant the blood was not his own. But I felt bad for whatever other cat had crossed him. He once again refused any offered food and seemed to move about very sluggishly for the rest of the night. I didn't think much of his adventures outside since he had been an outdoor cat previously. I did grow concerned when I looked near the back porch steps where many of the stray cats congregated and I saw a tremendous volume of flies swarming near it. I figured something might have died under there, but when I went to check it out, I found several small bones and a disturbing amount of blood staining the area. I was even more scared to let him out again if something was hurting or killing the other cats, but he was insistent and I gave in again and let him go. I remembered that day since I had to work, and when I returned, my neighbor Candace, an older retired woman, was looking for her dog, Brutus, who had not come home all day. He had been out in her fenced backyard and had vanished, and she was distraught and had no idea how he could have gotten out. In the evening at dinner time, Mr. Skittles returned home. His sides were bulging and he seemed to have gained 10 pounds based on how chunky he was all of a sudden. Again, he was spattered with red and I was worried he was getting into fights with outside animals. He refused any food for an entire day and half the day afterwards. I considered calling a vet and seeing if something might be wrong with him, but I was a little strapped for cash. And he did not seem outwardly injured or in trouble, so I figured as long as he didn't get rabies or something, he would be fine. The flies near the back porch had gotten worse. I went out there to check and was disturbed at what I had found. There was blood, fur, and scraps of what looked like the shredded remains of a leather collar. I was shocked when I found a small tag showing the name of Brutus. That was Candace's dog. Had he been in my yard at some point and lost his collar? 2 days afterward, Mr. Skittles seemed thin again somehow. He was begging to be let outside, and despite all the animal attacks, I let him out with the resolution that I needed to get him a rabies vaccine and keep an eye on him to be safe. I stayed up late that night and was concerned when he did not come home. I left my porch light on and watched till almost 2 a.m. I noticed mine was the only light on, which seemed weird since normally Candace would still have some of her lights on. Sleeping or not, she always left them on for security. I thought it was odd they were shut down just then. The next day, Mr. Skittles still hadn't returned, and I was worried he was lost as well. I was about to put up my own missing pet flyers when I saw him lumber into the house. He looked gigantic, and blood was tinged all over his fur. Fortunately, he had no apparent injuries. Before I could check too closely, he came inside, plopped himself on the couch, and went to sleep. He slept for almost 2 days straight. Nothing could stir him, and I thought it was strange he wouldn't get up for anything. Last night when I was cooking dinner, I noticed I was out of eggs. Since I needed a couple for the dinner I was making, I decided I might go over and ask Candace for some. She often offered help with my misadventures in cooking, and I figured she wouldn't mind. I went over to her house and noticed her mail piling up in the box outside. I considered that she might be away on vacation or something, but her car was still in the driveway. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer, and I reluctantly went back home. It seemed very strange for her to be out without her car, but I didn't know what was going on for sure, so I went back home and went to bed. Mr. Skittles woke me up in the middle of the night and was yowling to go outside. It was very early in the morning, so I got up and let him out of my room, but didn't go with him to the door. I thought I heard a thumping or crashing sound and figured he might have knocked something over doing zoomies. I was annoyed, but too tired to deal with it just then. After a couple of minutes, I was woken up again by a loud scream. It rang throughout the house for a moment and was suddenly cut off. It sounded horrible, and I panicked, realizing someone was in my house. I grabbed my phone for a flashlight and cautiously stepped out of my bedroom. I heard a wet, crunching sound and smelled blood immediately. I was scared and moved towards the light switch in the hall. I reached for the switch and gasped out loud when the hall was illuminated. To my shock and horror, I saw a man with a ski mask covering his face, lying on the ground in the hall. He was dead, and a large pool of blood was surrounding his body. His throat was torn open, and the second shock of the night was the small form I saw beside his body. It was Mr. Skittles, and he was taking large, gruesome bites out of the intruder's neck, his jaw extending like a snake to allow him to consume huge chunks of meat. He turned to me and purred and dropped a large chunk of flesh near where I sat, in some gesture of morbid tribute. Crouching back in horror at the gruesome spectacle, I realized I had found out what Mr. Skittles had been eating. When Mr. Skittles finished his morbid meal and laid down for a long nap, I finally summoned the nerve to call the police. I told them a complete lie and said that it was a mountain lion that had come into our neighborhood and had attacked the intruder while looking for food. I even speculated that it was responsible for the animal disappearances. Despite the outlandish nature of the lie, the police didn't argue, since the intruder clearly had not been killed by conventional means or by any human hands. Eventually, the police had left and removed the intruder's body. Later, in a separate and tragic investigation, they had also removed the mostly eaten remains of Miss Candace next door. I felt bad about it since I knew it was no mountain lion that had done that. Now, I found myself in a predicament. I know I have to find some way to feed Mr. Skittles. I thought cat food was expensive, but this is going to be a bit trickier since Mr. Skittles is always hungry, and I am afraid of what he might try to eat next. Thanks so much for listening, guys. A quick shout out to my patrons: Kevin Kess, Sabiel Eclipse, 055555, Cormac Wells, Amara, Matthew Steiner, Cupcake Hips, Alonzo, Mr. Sankofa, Michael Milburn, Kozak, Icy Narrates, Jesse Hartley, Eric Cifuentes, Andreas Anderson London, Lawrence Wallen, Geek Sanctuary, Melissa Perez, and this guy. That is someone's actual username. I love that. Thanks again so much for watching, guys. If there's anything you would like me to pray for, I would love to know how I can be praying for you. I hope you have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next video.